State Senator Josh Newman of Fullerton is a political newcomer who's quickly become a center of attention in Sacramento. He was a surprise winner last year, beating out a better-known Democrat, then knocking off a GOP office holder to turn a red seat blue. Once in the Senate, he cast a crucial vote in favor of the controversial gas tax. Now he's fighting a recall effort by Republicans who say that vote betrayed his Orange County constituents. The governor and other Democrats are pulling out all the stops to save him. So, just who is Josh Newman? Is he a political pawn or a new style public servant? He's here right now on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by...
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Memorial Care is transforming the way healthcare is delivered, keeping our communities and businesses healthy by guiding them on the path to wellness with easily accessible hospitals, physician offices, and outpatient centers. Memorial Care, leading the way.
Facebook post is forever.
That's right,
Yeah.
That's right. Well, hi, I'm Rick Reiff, and I'm talking with Senator Josh Newman. Josh, great to have you on. Never a dull moment for you in the last year or so.
Not so far, Rick. No, actually no.
Yeah, so let's talk about, before we get into your upset election, your controversial vote on the gas tax, which will be kicking in shortly. Let's talk a little bit about you. Just tell us your background, where you're from, and all that sort of thing.
So in brief, I am, as you already know, not a politician by training or probably even by temperament. My background, really briefly, is a graduate of Yale University, former Army officer, worked in a bunch of different areas of a fairly successful career in first municipal government in San Francisco, then the entertainment business down here, and then in the internet technology sphere for about 15 years.
You had me at Yale, by the way. I mean, that's pretty. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
What did you major in at Yale?
You will be surprised here. I majored in history, and my focus was on 20th century American political history.
Okay, so and where did you grow up?
I grew up a little town in upstate New York called Poughkeepsie, about an hour and a half north of New York City.
They make jokes about Poughkeepsie, don't they?
They do, and it was a code word on that Callista Flockhart show. I forget what it's called now, but yeah, Poughkeepsie. It's a strange word. Nice little town.
Yeah. Okay. So you start doing a couple things. How do you get out to California?
I actually landed here as part of getting out of the United States Army. So I was discharged from the Army after my active duty service obligation was completed in the Presidio of San Francisco. At the time, it was still active. And wound up, I had a bunch of friends and in California, wound up staying.
Okay, and you've been married for how long?
I've been married for 8 years, and as we tape this, today is my 8th anniversary.
Well, congratulations. And you just had a baby.
Just had a baby. So we had my, obviously not the best planner. I have a 16-month-old, and so she was born about 2 weeks before last June's primary.
Okay, and so you had a lot going on last year.
Try to stay busy.
Baby.
Yeah,
okay, so
busy.
Let's talk about the election, because next to Hillary Clinton carrying Orange County, you were probably the surprise story of the election. In the primary, and by the way, we're taking a look right now at a picture of you campaigning. That's you in the bear costume. Had you ever run before?
No, and I'd never worn a bear costume before. And so in running, I was the third, as you know, I was the third candidate in a three-person field. And on sort of the one side, you had a Democrat that had a fairly, sort of established record. And a bunch
of former mayor of Irvine.
Former mayor of Irvine, and had actually moved to Fullerton to qualify as a resident to run in the 29th. On the other side, you had a Republican office holder, as you noted in your intros, Ling Chang. And I was the third person in. So I clearly, I'm not a politician. I'm a Democrat, but I didn't have the relationships or the endorsements or access to the funds. And so I had to figure out how to run a kind of creative low dollar campaign, and so one of the things we came up with was having a mascot. And so the picture that you showed was actually, it's me in the costume that day, but it was because I decided to see if I was going to hurt somebody if I hired a kid and had him go stand in the sun in that heavy college mascot costume.
So you decided you had to do it yourself.
I thought I would test it, like any good cook tests his recipe.
The big Newman thing, were you doing a little appealing to the Seinfeld voters there?
Oh, that was a totally deliberate reference to Seinfeld. So I have a friend who's a very creative guy, and I said, hey, I'm running for state senate, and I said, what do you got? He's always good for some creative idea. And he said to me, hey, Josh, if you don't use the Hello Newman thing from Seinfeld, you're an idiot. So what we came up with was that classic "Hello, my name is" tag that you saw, and so good reference. And I don't want to brag, but I won an award for best yard sign in the country, and so a Polly Award in the political consulting industry awards last year.
As you're doing this, are friends, are other people telling you you're crazy? You don't have a chance.
Well, they weren't my friends. It was everybody. It was everybody in the party, right? And established people in politics were telling me, not that you're crazy, but you're stupid, that you're making a mistake, and that you will regret this. It's not your turn. We've already got a guy. But my take was, if you take your democracy seriously, the top two primary was very deliberate. It was supposed to open up the field for other voices. And my sort of general approach, I think voting, if you think about what voting really is, it's how we hire people in the public sphere to represent us. You should have more candidates, not fewer. And so I was one of three. It's not like I was way on the fringe. But my argument to the voters, in using things like the bear costume and the sign, was very straightforward, which is if you're going to hire somebody to work for you in Sacramento, hire somebody who is fairly accomplished, who has experience in other things other than politics, but who will go work for you deliberately and diligently and be accessible once they get there, which is exactly what I've tried to do.
So what spurred you? Was it just that, or was there an issue? Is there something that made you decide to leave a business career to run for office?
Well, the issue, or actually the segue, Rick, was I'd worked in technology for about 15 years, but back in 2012, I got very interested as a veteran in the question about why veterans who had come back to Southern California after completing their service were having so much trouble finding good career-oriented employment. And for those vets who don't suffer from service-related issues, that are related to their service, that would serve as barriers to full-time work, their rates of unemployment should be zero. I mean, we're all truly grateful for their service, and yet, even as the recession was winding down in 2012, rates of unemployment for vets were staying materially higher than their non-veteran peers. And so I got, it progressively more involved in that issue. And what I eventually came up with was, the big failure is on the public side, and it's a leadership failure. Is that we spend a great deal of money across a whole bunch of levels of government on veterans programs, but we weren't making a difference. And I think the observation is, if politicians who are always so eager to get their picture taken with veterans aren't going to do the thing that everybody agrees with, that everybody would support, what are the odds that we're going to do the harder things where there are competing constituencies or countervailing arguments? So that was kind of my entry. And it was I actually testified in front of a committee in Sacramento. I was asked to come testify on veteran employment. I thought it was cool. And I was impressed that at the end of my testimony, nobody was listening. They were all on their cell phones like your kid at Thanksgiving dinner. And I came home, and my wife admits it, although she's regretted it since. She's the one who said, hey, if you really want to make a difference, you should think about running. Bob Huff was termed out in 2016. And so that was sort of the genesis of my urge to run.
So you actually had the imprimatur from the go-ahead from the household.
Well, temporarily.
Yeah.
And there is that question whether or not she really meant it, or it was sort of a put up or shut up kind of thing. Right. But she did give me the idea.
Okay. And just to close the loop on this election, you win razor thin when you beat Ling Ling Chang, an assembly woman. And in fact, it took a few days for you to know that you
took weeks, not days, weeks. When they stopped counting votes on election night on November 8th, I think I was down by about 3,900 votes. But as they continued counting, now my district includes 3 counties, so that's 3 different registrars counting different batches of votes every day for 3 weeks. The margin gradually got smaller, and eventually I wound up winning by 2,600 votes.
Were you down and then elated, or what kind of emotions were you?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think I was down and then sort of dumbstruck, and then and then elated. And there's always a question: careful what you wish for.
You mentioned 3 counties. What are the big cities in your district?
So my district,
29th
Senate District. It's all or parts of 16 different cities in 3 different counties. So it's from Cypress up through La Habra, in Orange County. I live in Fullerton, southeastern Los Angeles County, which is from Rowland Heights up to West Covina, and then a little slice of San Bernardino with the city of Chino Hills.
Okay, and by the way, how much did you spend and how much did your opponent spend?
So in the primary, I spent about $100,000. My opponent spent about $600,000. In the general, when I wound up getting a little more support from, the party and other folks who had been supporting my opponent in the primary, my side spent about $2.3 million, which to me is a staggering amount of money. My opponent, plus her party, plus independent expenditures, spent $6.6 million.
Okay, so you were outnumbered. You're the David slaying the Goliath. You get to Sacramento, and boom, there's a vote on the gas tax. And we're going to roll in something right now that shows what this means. And you weren't the only deciding vote. Everybody was a deciding vote, but it passed by the bare minimum. One Republican in the legislature voted for it in the Senate. So you were a key vote. And so it passes. And as we're seeing here, gas will be going up 12 cents a gallon, diesel 20. Car registration fees anywhere from $25 to $175. I think it's fair to say the estimates are it will mean several $100s a year to the average driver. And we're now looking also at this the gas tax increases on top of other things that make California gas expensive. And as you can see, according to AAA, California now a little over $3 a gallon. Rest of the country $2.50. Dollars. So again, it's a hit. And so of course, the Republicans have made no secret of the fact that it's the gazelle theory. You're the weakest in the herd, and they're going after you. They want to recall you to send a message to get rid of this 2/3 majority in the legislature. So how do you respond to that? Why did you vote for the gas tax? And did you know you were setting yourself up for this?
I'll start with last question first. No, I did not know I was setting myself up for this. My thinking on voting for this tax was, we have a real problem in California. Anybody who drives in California is well aware that our roads and bridges are in substandard condition, and that's the result of more than 20 years of neglect. Right? Obviously, that 20 years predates my election. The best way I could think about it was kind of using kind of the homeowners association as an analogy. And so the way, if you were elected to the board of a homeowners association, you found out that your predecessors had neglected the property for 20 years, what would you do, right? You would fix the property. That's your obligation. And so, what is the legislature except for, California's HOA in a sense? And so, so in voting for the tax, I thoroughly appreciate that those are precious dollars. That's an additional burden to voters, to motorists. And so the obligation on the legislature side is to make sure that money is spent smartly, transparently, and accountably. The thing that gets omitted as we talk about this typically is on that same night that April 6th we voted for SB 1, the road repair tax. We also voted on a constitutional amendment, ACA 5, and I am the one of the two primary authors of that amendment along with Jim Frazier in the Assembly. And what that will do is that will amend the Constitution to make it legally impossible to spend any of the new funds raised for taxes for roads on any other purpose. And I think that's important because I think people, are duly skeptical at this point of how government spends their money, and they're deserving of every assurance that if we take their tax dollars for a specific purpose, it will get spent on that purpose.
So how do you respond, though? And what were the three things you said the money should be spent? You just said three things.
Transparently, accountably. I don't know what the third one was.
Right. But, I think efficiently or something like that.
Okay,
but anyways,
sure.
But that's, I think, the point about the critics are saying you're just feeding the beast with this increase, that there is no accountability. Money is not spent efficiently, and your Republican colleague in the Senate, John Morlock, who has been on this show, is withering in his criticism of Caltrans and says, for example, Caltrans hardly outsources any of its work, 10%, whereas the national average is 50%, and some states are close to 100% contracting out of engineering services. so that when you have downturns, and nothing's going on, you don't have a bunch of thousands of engineers that you're paying for doing nothing. This bill doesn't address any of that. There's no reform. Let me ask you first, do you think Caltrans is doing a good job? Do you think they're spending money smartly?
I'm not sure I could opine on that question. So California's so big that I can't say Caltrans stays busy. We're a huge state, and the need is huge. But to the larger point about the tax versus sort of the larger question about our budgets are big and the state is less sufficient than it could be. You don't solve the one problem by neglecting the other. So that's where I came in was, is the answer to, I think a lot of John's criticisms are valid, but in this particular instance, this is something that has been necessary for 2 decades. And we have kicked the can down the road. So I would argue that we have to address our transportation infrastructure for a whole bunch of reasons, including its role in the California economy. But it's not mutually exclusive to solving budget problems, right? They're 2 separate issues. And so as a new member, I'd endeavor to work on both. But as it was presented to me, there really wasn't a plausible sort of alternative plan presented to us that would let us make the same investments, make the same difference without incurring those burdens. So, and I appreciate the burden, but again, I do think that voters deserve the assurance that when we raise taxes or spend their monies, period, that they have the assurance that we'll do it well.
Well, again, though, just one more point on the gas tax for people who say it's business as usual in Sacramento. John Morlock now has this saying, "Who's your daddy?" which he uses on Democrats, meaning that your daddy are the public employee unions. Let's just take that one issue, which I find a compelling argument. Caltrans outsources 10% of its engineering, most states 50% or more. It saves money. It reduces the cost of infrastructure.
Not always, Rick. So
you dispute that? You think 10% might be a good number?
Maybe, but non-union work, outsourced work isn't always cheaper. It's not always cheaper, right? So, and again, I'm a new member. I don't serve any of these committees, and I will agree with sort of the general notion that we should be as diligent and rigorous as we can to find efficiencies and savings. So I actually, I don't want to argue with John on that score, but about the tax itself, there truly is a need. Now, if the question is, how do we actually do the work? I'm open to lots of different approaches, including John's suggestions and others. But the operative question with respect to that tax was it necessary, and what are the dangers of doing nothing? And I think the dangers of doing nothing have become very obvious, right? We had a bridge washout in Monterey that's yet to be replaced. You had the Oroville Dam up in Northern California that literally came within an hour of collapsing during the winter's heavy rains, and that was clearly due to neglect over several decades. So, we can't afford to do that either in California.
And of course, public opinion polls suggest, depending on how you ask the question, people either approve of the tax or they don't approve of it, and it's kind of in the wording.
Right.
So maybe this recall effort that's going on will be a bellwether of how Californians feel about it. But let's talk about the recall that's going on. Carl DeMaio, a Republican political operative and radio host in San Diego, is leading this recall. They collected enough signatures, but now there's a campaign going on to, and we're looking at a couple of posters here. One for recalling you, and one on your side saying don't sign the recall petition. Explain to us, as you understand, what's the process that happens now?
Well, so the process for a recall of a state legislator in California is a requirement to secure the equivalent of 20% of the participating voters in the last election as signers for a recall petition. And once you hit that threshold, that will trigger a recall election. In my case, we had about 315,000 people vote in my election, so the number is, give or take, 63,500. And so, what happened in my case was the Carl DeMaio, the Howard Jarvis folks, California Republican Party, raised funds all over the state. They raised, give or take, $800,000. That money was spent on hiring professional signature gatherers, the folks that you see in front of the supermarket, who stood out with signs that said "Stop the gas tax." who asked people explicitly to sign a petition to repeal or stop the gas tax. And people signed sort of reflexively or almost out of courtesy, because in many cases these signature gatherers said, "Hey, I get paid to do this. I get paid between $3 and $10 a signature. That's a fact." And so they were powerfully motivated to get as many signatures as possible. It has become clear as we've moved forward that a very large, though indeterminate number of people who signed were not aware that they were not signing a petition to repeal a gas tax. They were signing a petition to recall their state senator. And that raises questions as to kind of the ethics and the integrity of this process.
In a way, now, the other side says that it's your side that is playing fast and loose, that when it comes to collecting petitions on, or signatures on petitions, it's not uncommon to overstate, misstate, do that kind of thing. People sign a petition; they should know what they're signing.
There is a fine line.
Save our schools. You can have something, whatever the petition is. It's save our schools, but it's something quite different.
That's fine. So the notion saving our schools, save the environment.
But all right. Having said that, the legislature then, really for your benefit, changed the rules, changed the law, and said you can ask people to take their signatures off.
Well,
now,
that's
the first one, the court overturned that, and so then they passed the second one, which is now in court. So it kind of looks like, the powers in Sacramento are, and that's why when I made a reference to political pawn, by no means do I suggest that you are, have the demeanor of a political pawn, but that these are, political forces beyond your control, and they're playing with big bucks, and they're doing things because they want to keep that 2/3.
Now that is true on both sides, right? And so clearly, if you think about sort of the logic of this whole exercise, it's not really about my vote, as you said. If 27 people vote, and that's the required number, any one of those 27 is the deciding vote, aren't they? If 26 Democrats voted and one Republican voted, I think you could make a very good argument that 27th vote was a Republican. Mm-hmm. He's the deciding vote. So it's not really about the tax per se. The tax is an opportunity to try and overturn the result of the last election. Right. Mine, that weak gazelle theory, makes sort of starts with the notion that I was the closest election. And what this is really about is about changing the balance of power in the legislature. And 27 is the important number. It gives Democrats a supermajority. And so there are, clearly strong sort of views and motivations on both sides. Now, am I the beneficiary of changes in the law? Probably not really. We're going to have a recall election anyway. The question as to the timing of the election. And so the proponents, so there's Carl DeMaio, and there's also the Howard Jarvis folks. Their goal, was to instigate a special election as soon as possible. And so everything they've done has been in the service of that goal. But that's not how it has to be. So the goal, I would argue, in the changes that were made to the process were to ensure that voters who might have been misled, as to the nature and intent of this signature gathering process, would have an opportunity to rescind their signatures if necessary. And it's important to note, it's actually illegal under California law in the Elections Code. It's a misdemeanor offense to intentionally mislead a voter as to the nature and intent of a signature gathering process. That is clearly what happened. Now, maybe not in all cases, but you don't get to 70,000 signatures that fast.
But anyway, when you all said and done, you think, will there be an election sometime next year?
Oh yeah, and so that's never really been an issue. And so from my point of view, I accept the recall process dates back to 1911, and it's important. The recall, the referendum, the initiative. The real question is, the integrity here. So this notion that I am guilty of some sort of huge betrayal of my voters, I'd argue that's not really probably true, especially considering that I voted the same as 80 other people.
Okay, well,
this is opportunistic.
Yeah. Okay, and as one who has already won 2 upset elections, perhaps it'll be another in the eyes of the Republicans. They are just they're smacking their lips right now. They're saying that this vote does you in, that this is a traditionally red district that you have, that voting against this gas tax, and they have also thrown in the fact that you cast the vote in favor of the universal health care proposal that was roundly criticized that the Senate leader wouldn't bring it
Well,
you know, when
it was
anyway.
roundly criticized, but the reason the assembly leader didn't bring forward was the math, right? And I don't disagree with that, and I actually noted that in my own statement the day we voted, which was we simply don't have the money at the moment in California to implement this system. That's why. I mean, there's plenty of support for fixing our healthcare system, but it's unrealistic
But
to
single
do it.
payer, is that you think?
I'm
I'm just saying, a lot of people love
yeah.
it, but the Republicans are saying you're in the wrong district for that
Well,
kind of
you know,
stuff.
so just to be clear, my district, I'm one of 5 members who touch Orange County in some way. And so my district is, give or take, 50-50, right? It's about the same number of Democrats as Republicans. The irony of this whole thing, Rick, is I'm the guy who's targeted. I'm probably the least ideological Democrat in the state Senate. And I'd argue that as an Army vet, former business guy, I'm actually quite reflective of my district, which is a politically centrist district. This idea that I'm some sort of, first of all, that I'm some crazy lefty, but secondly, that I have such power that I've raised everybody's taxes and I'm going to repeal Prop 13. I mean, that's the kind of hyperbole you hear in these kinds of
Okay,
things.
and we are out of time, but we have an open mic segment, a lot to cover, so we'll do that, including what some of the things you'd like to do for your district. So that's it for now. Thanks again to my guest, Senator Josh Newman. You can watch the show and past shows at pbssocal.org or rickreiff.com. You can also catch our shows and our post-show open mic chatter on YouTube. And follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again on Inside OC. Inside OC is brought to you by
Each new community 5 Point brings to life represents a promise delivered. Great neighborhoods are more than just places to live, they are places to connect. 5 Point is a proud sponsor of public television and community programming.
Chapman University is a proud sponsor of Inside OC and community programming.